Hey everyone, this is Rochelle. Thanks for joining us on the Go Shout Love podcast. We are so excited to introduce to you Samuel, our featured kiddo for August 2018, and officially launch our podcast. I recently got to travel with our team to meet Samuel and his amazing family, and can't wait for you guys to join us in shouting love for them. In this episode, Josh sits down with Samuel's parents, Jeff and Alison Silver, and discusses the surprise diagnosis of osteogenesis imperfecta shortly after his birth. They also discuss the misconceptions of brittle bone disease, what they've learned from Samuel, and more. Before we jump in, we want to say a special thank you to the generous and incredibly talented Monique Dong, who creates beautiful illustrations for each of our featured families. These illustrations are available for purchase along with a Samuel-inspired Unbreakable t-shirt on our website at goshout.love. If you want an awesome illustration of your family, be sure to connect with and support Monique through the partners page on our website. Thanks for listening. Now let's meet Samuel and his family.
Jeff and Allison, thanks so much for letting us visit you here in your home. It's such an honor to be with you and meet Samuel. If you don't mind, let's just start with you sharing just a little bit about yourselves, introduce yourselves, and tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, I'm Alison Silver, and this is Jeff Silver, and this is Samuel Silver. He is just about 3 years old, and he was born with osteogenesis imperfecta type 3, which is also known as brittle bones. He is a happy boy despite everything. Great personality. The resilience is incredible. Has been through a lot in those 3 short years. When I was pregnant with Sam at our 20-week anatomy scan, that's when doctors first noticed there were some complications. And at first they thought he had achondroplasia. So we had the scan and we were called back into a room with a doctor, and the doctor was noticeably uncomfortable in delivering the news to us, which made us very uncomfortable. And he talked about the shape of Sam's skull and him only having a 2-vessel cord, and his arms and legs, the long bones were measuring at that point, I think about 5 or 6 weeks behind, and they were bowed. So he told us, he's like, I believe we're looking at a child with achondroplasia, and he proceeded to tell us there wasn't much they could do at that practice, and that we would have to go see a specialist. And that was probably one of the toughest nights of the whole pregnancy, because we felt so alone. Like we were really almost discharged from that practice, but we hadn't yet made contact with the new specialist yet. Floundering. And we were just floundering. We were told, because the appointment was so late in the day, that we would get a call the next day at some point from someone either in New Haven or Hartford. And so it was a long night of us, the what ifs and the worry, and we both got up and went to work the next day and pretended like everything was normal, because that helped us. And we went about our day, and thankfully, we were able to see a specialist that day from Hartford, and they confirmed everything our doctor said at the 20-week scan, that Sam's skull shape was off. His forehead was, how did they describe it? His forehead was lost, or something with his forehead. The 2-vessel cord, his bones did not measure as they should. And so he started rattling off all these different conditions and dysplasias, a skeletal dysplasia, but he said there are 100, so it's hard for us to narrow it down. And that day we actually had an amniocentesis done to test the fluid to confirm achondroplasia. He really was thinking that's what it was. And then the waiting game started. So we had to wait about a month to find out if it was achondroplasia or not, and the test came back negative, that it wasn't achondroplasia. And we continued to see that specialist throughout the whole pregnancy. Pretty much every 2 weeks we had an ultrasound done, and every time we went, the bones just kept falling shorter and shorter behind in the pregnancy, always, at least 6 to 8 weeks behind, more and more bowed. He started to see a femur fracture on one of them, mentioned osteogenesis imperfecta, and quickly dismissed it because he said we'd see a lot more fractures. His rib cage would look different. So he really thought it was, by the end of the whole pregnancy, just going to be a child with short arms and legs. That's really what we were led to believe. He at one point asked us if we wanted to terminate, which I believe is protocol for them, and that was never in the cards for us. It took us a long time to have Sam and start a family. Is something we always wanted, and it took us several years, and so we've always looked upon him as a blessing from God, and we were gonna nurture him, love him, and raise him no matter what his condition was, because he, in our eyes, was, a gift from God. So
I want to back up just a second, if that's okay. So you said at the first kind of test that showed there might be something a little bit off from what doctor would say is the normal progression was around 20 weeks.
Yep.
And so when they said that first, this is what we think from a diagnosis, were you familiar with that at all?
With the achondroplasia?
Yeah, with the achondroplasia.
Yeah, we were aware of it because I watched like Little People Big World and, some of those shows. So we were aware of it. And even though it was still hard to hear, because like I said, we had to go through a lot to have Sam. He's an IVF baby. So even the early days of the pregnancy, we were monitored very closely with a lot of appointments. And I think at least being the pregnant one, I think I was just so over the moon happy that I was naive in a way that I never even considered that there could be complications, that there could be challenges. So when that was mentioned, achondroplasia, that was really hard for us because we knew what achondroplasia was, and we just knew there would be challenges, as Sam would get older, being short stature. And even when the doctor mentioned osteogenesis imperfecta, as rare as it is, I remember reading in college a book by Jodi Picoult, I think her name is Picoult, called Handle with Care, and it was about a child with osteogenesis imperfecta, a little girl. And so I immediately knew what that condition was when he mentioned it. And when he dismissed it, I remember breathing a sigh of relief because I remember in the book what a tough, challenging life this little girl had. And Jeff and I talked that night, we were relieved a little bit, only to find out then, a few short months later that Sam had this condition.
But even leading up all the way through the end of the pregnancy, that was still the diagnosis, right? Is that what you said? That they didn't really know? They didn't know.
They just said with a focal femoral hypoplasia.
Focal femoral hypoplasia is what he kind of narrowed it down to. And he said there's not really, I don't even know that that's really a diagnosis, but that's just kind of how he's presenting, and that's kind of how he
would just have short femurs.
It was just focused on the short femurs, and his arms are a little short, but not too short.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what he...
So even going into delivery, we were thinking, okay, that's all right. We're just going to have a shorter child, and that's fine. We weren't
prepared for the brittle nature of his bones
and everything
and
that
the
comes
fractures
with it.
when he was born. So
So Jeff, talk a little bit about that when he was born, and you mentioned earlier about some of the initial fractures, even from the delivery.
So he was induced at 37 weeks, and he was born at 1 a.m, and when he came out, he had 4 fractures. One of them being his left femur.
Both femurs.
Well, which one was the one that was
the left femur?
The left femur was broken visibly, and it was up near his eye, up near his face. So, and he was whimpering, and come to think of it now, he was probably in a lot of pain. We just thought, he's cute, he's whimpering, and we weren't really 100% sure that it was broken, but it didn't look right. And he ended up having both legs fractured during birth, his skull, his arm. So it was kind of tough to see. He was pretty much immediately brought down to the NICU because he was having a little bit of trouble breathing, and looking back on it now, he probably had some rib fractures and stuff like that too. That was never confirmed, but we still had no idea of his diagnosis at this point until, was it 5 the next morning?
It was 5 hours later. Because we were told, okay, give us an hour in the NICU to do tests and x-rays and, whatever, assessments, and then you can come down in an hour. And so they gave us the number to the NICU, and at an hour we called because, we're first-time parents, we want to see him, we're so over the moon, and they said, not yet. And they said, call back in an hour. Sure enough, in an hour, we called back, and We weren't allowed then. And that's when we started getting a little nervous, like what is taking so long? And then a nurse came to our room about 5 a.m. And that's when she said, "Are you familiar at all with osteogenesis imperfecta?" What kind of clued them in right away to that diagnosis was his eyes. The whites of his eyes are
blue sclera. Yeah.
He's got a blue sclera, and they noticed that right off the bat before they even started any of the other assessments. And then seeing the other fractures, they were able to piece it all together. And even then, we weren't allowed to see him. We had to wait a little bit longer. So she left us with this diagnosis, and we were left alone in the room without our child. And that was really tough, especially because we're in the postpartum wing, so you can hear all the other newborn babies with their parents in their rooms, and there's the bassinet next to our bed, and we're just like, that was it. Yeah. It was a teaching hospital. He was born at Hartford Hospital, and then he was in the NICU at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, and it's a teaching hospital, so every specialist we had, medical students with them, residents, which again, it was like, you're not just talking to one doctor, you're talking to several.
And you're in this moment that's in your mind, you've played out that it's going to go a certain way, surrounded by these other rooms that have their stories playing out the way you thought yours was going to. And now you're not only not being able to hold him or be in that moment that you want to be, but now you're dealing with so many people.
Yeah, and it was on display for everyone. Like, I felt like, you want that moment and that privacy to bond with your child. And obviously, anyone who has a child, after you have the child, the nurses are coming in and going, and the doctors to check on the baby. But we thought we'd have a few moments of quiet, and we never had that. And I felt it was really hard because we would no sooner get to Sam's bedside and a new specialist was coming over. Then the geneticist came and pulled us aside, and we were learning words and hearing things, and we were stopping doctors because they have a tendency to talk and assume you know what they're saying, and we're like, slow down. Like, we're on this high from having a baby and blindsided by everything going on in the process. So
from birth, how long was your hospital stay? From delivery?
Thankfully, only a month.
Okay.
It was a long month, but
it was kind of tough too, because he's a little bit of show and tell at the beginning, because it's so rare that a lot of the doctors had never seen it before. So they were coming in. We didn't really like it because he would be napping and they'd want to see his eyes and
they'd
like,
be
can you wake him up? Or
back,
like, it's like, we're like, no. Like,
didn't feel like his best interest maybe always at the front.
It was more like,
and being new parents,
we were let's show like kind of show other doctors. I mean, we obviously want other doctors to learn from him, but but he was wait till he's awake and stuff like that. So it was a little tough, Sure.
And having, the sea of physical therapists and doctors and everyone just watching and waiting because they were so afraid that he was going to break, because no one knew just how fragile he was and how much we could move him safely. We had to learn how to do we had to learn how to do diaper changes differently. You want that? Okay. Diaper changes were challenging, and we couldn't lift his legs up like a typical baby to do a diaper change. We had to just learn to lift underneath his butt, and even to pick him up. We couldn't pick him up underneath his shoulders or anything like that. It's a little challenging.
And so there are multiple types of OI, right? And so how long did it take for the diagnosis to be narrowed down to this is the severity or the level of...
It took about 6 weeks, but the geneticist had said, she's like, given how Sam's presenting, she's like, he's going to be a type 3. She's like, he's severe, given just his feeding issues and the sclera and the number of fractures. But it took 6 weeks, and then it was confirmed type 3. Type 3 is a very severe form of Sam's condition. Types 1 and type 4 are more mild. Sam's condition can be inherited, but no one in our family has osteogenesis imperfecta.
So really, even finding out, it kind of came as a major shock, because there wouldn't have been any indicators as to that this could even be a possibility.
Right, because like the more mild forms, types 1 and type 4, can be inherited. I mean, you can have an inherited type 3, more severe. But there was no history in our family, so they said he's really just a spontaneous mutation. I hate that word mutation that they use, but but at first we were thinking, okay, after the first few days, we're like, okay, brittle bones, that's tough. It's it's going to be a challenge, but bones heal. We can do this. And it was only after really the first week or so that we started learning that there can be respiratory issues, nutrition issues, every system, cardiac issues, brittle teeth. It was amazing what we learned that
because like a building block of almost every tissue in the body. So and
that's what he's lacking.
So he's lacking. Yeah, his collagen is of poor quality is how they describe it. So like even like the valves in his heart, like so he has to be monitored by like pretty much every type of specialist. That's every normal specialist anyway. His anatomy is a little funky.
So if someone just hears brittle bone disease, they're really not capturing all the different the different ways that the body's affected by OI.
Right. I think that's the hardest thing for us to get across to people, even people like in our family. I mean, they're like, oh, he looks great, he's doing great, and he is doing great, but there's so much monitoring behind the scenes and so many appointments that we have to go to just to make sure everything stays that way, and just because it affects everything, so it's tough to maybe relay that to people that aren't living with us in a daily basis, because I mean it's.
So we started the Facebook page while he was in the hospital, and it became very therapeutic for us because it's like we would kind of put out there what the challenge was or what we were experiencing, and we received so much support and strength. And
Jeff, do you recall a moment where maybe you had a moment to take a deep breath and kind of feel like, okay, we can handle this? Like we're not that things are going to be easy or quote unquote normal, but that you like.
I think even from the very beginning, I thought we could handle it only because we were strong enough together. And I've always kind of tried to be positive, and I've always like, oh, he's my son. We got to do what we got to do. Like it is, it is what it is type of thing. So from the beginning, no matter what it was, I kind of think like us together, or I mean, I know I felt that way. I'm sure you felt that way. There was like, we just have to do what we have to do. So.
And we kind of skipped past that. I should have started there. Tell us about how you guys met. Like, what's your story before family?
Well, we actually met on Match.com. We met online, which is
turned into a Match commercial. Review.
Yeah. So, because I was working kind of strange hours at my job, and you had tried kind of dating around.
As a teacher, it's a female-dominated field, and everyone would try and set me up with their nephew or brother, and it was tough. It maybe didn't work out.
She went first, and I replied, and the rest is history, more or less. We went, we dated for a while and got married.
In 2011 we got married, and we knew right away we wanted children. But we took about a year or so. We traveled and enjoyed life.
Yeah, exactly.
And then again, we were naive, not thinking it would take so long. And then, there were challenges, and we, suffered the loss of twins during that, before we had to go through IVF and IUI. So there was a lot of challenges prior to in just trying to start a family. And looking back now, and I've always said this to Jeff, I always look for the reason why, and everything, in my mind, everything always happens for a reason. And so I look upon our challenges with infertility as, almost like
preparing us.
The pregame. Like, it was almost like strengthening us and, bonding us even closer as a couple and preparing us for what was to come. Like that God knew, Sam was going to come our way, and that we needed to be as strong and ready for him as possible. And so I do look upon that now, that even though it was an obstacle, we needed that. We needed to go through some of those obstacles to be ready for this little guy over here.
Alison, before we started recording, you mentioned connecting with OI families on Facebook, and I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about that community and what it has meant to you.
That's how we ended up in Delaware, because I reached out to the OI parents on our Facebook support group, and I said, help, my son is diagnosed with this, and the cast, this full body cast they want to put him in took 3 of us to get him in it. And I'm like, we can't do that every day. There are times it's just Jeff or myself here. And so they all recommended Dr. Shaw in Delaware. And so we were able to go down there. But even by seeing him,
what's up, bud?
Even seeing that doctor and having an MRI, he found something completely unrelated. He found Sam had hydrocephalus. And so we had to see then a neurosurgeon back home. And Sam, within a week of seeing that neurosurgeon, needed surgery to place a shunt. And then, what, buddy?
You want to put these on your feet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Come over here.
So yeah, that first year was a lot of one problem led to another problem, led to something else, and next thing you know, he was seeing a pulmonologist and having he has central and obstructive apnea and needing oxygen support at night. And so getting used to, you running a pulse ox machine and monitoring that and the alarms going off. So it was like, it was
the alarms were
like being in a hospital
because they were
room
set so strict for the first year, really, first year, that like anything would set them off. So even if
the slight teething, like a little fever, would set it off, and
like
it would go off all night long.
A little bit of a higher heart rate, it would go off, and it would be like every few minutes. So it's like
it's kind of the better safe than sorry setting. It's like,
that's exactly what it was, but it was like a little too tight. So
he's still on oxygen at night, and he still has the feeding tube, but only at night. Like recently, it was, I want to say April or May. He no longer needs tube feedings during the day, which is huge. Yeah. That he finally is starting to eat more by mouth. His teeth are brittle too, so I think that has been a challenge for him. Certain foods he has a harder time eating, and he would throw up a lot of stuff. And so he's improving a lot. It's just been slow getting there, and that's okay.
Right. Everything's at Sam's speed. It's all slow, but it's all, it's almost everything has gotten better.
Yeah, and the doctors have become more on board with everything. Early on, when we would bring him to appointments, we were told we weren't doing this as well as parents, or we weren't doing this, or your child's never going to do that. And now and when we would try and educate them from our research on OI and what we learned from other OI parents, the doctors finally came around to it and started realizing he's not going to grow like an average child. It is like a form of dwarfism to a degree, that he's not going to be on the average, height and
kind of has its own
charts.
set of benchmarks. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but early on it was a big
They would
fight.
show us the growth charts, and he'd be like down here, not even on the chart, and they're like,
So
he's got his own curve.
How would you compare or contrast the conversations and feedback from the medical field and the people that you were working with versus that community that you found of OI parents?
I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly, but I think that the OI parents kind of steered us in the right direction as far as, like, doctors are great, but there's doctors that specialize in his condition that are excellent. You know what I mean? That are specialized in his condition, and they will know kind of more than the average doctor would, and they're kind of like the authority when it comes to certain aspects of his condition.
They can kind of get you to better answers faster.
Exactly.
If you could go back to tell yourself something about your journey that would come over the next almost 3 years, kind of leading up to his birth, what would you tell yourself?
You got this.
Yeah. I
think
we were super overwhelmed at first, but looking back on it, it was overwhelming, but it's nothing we couldn't handle. It just, we would have told ourselves,
you're stronger. You're stronger than you think.
Yeah, you're stronger than you think. Yeah, I think that's.
We were pushed to our, breaking points. Literally, no pun intended with breaking, and that he is going to do more than what we were told early on. And it's
He'll
okay.
surprise you, and he'll do awesome.
Right. It's we were hoping for one path, like any parent is, and we're on a different path, and that's okay. This path has been so rewarding, and we are so blessed because he has taught us more in 3 years than we've taught him, I think.
Oh, yeah.
What would you say he's taught you?
I think resilience is the biggest thing, because
not sweat the small stuff.
Exactly. Like, he'll have a femur fracture and he'll be, I mean, yeah, it's painful at first, and he's good within a day. I mean, it's like,
just like Tylenol and ibuprofen, and he's just
good.
like fine. And so
once he squinted, he's like, I mean, if I had a femur fracture, I can imagine the pain. I mean, I've had a couple broken bones, but they've been painful, and he just kind of no big deal.
Yeah, it's just he puts things in perspective for us, that, you know, what's important in life and what's not important in life. And, you know, with all he goes through, it just makes us appreciate how easy things come for us, and, you know, also makes us so proud of how strong he is, and he pushes through and he finds a way. Like, he may have a broken arm, but he'll like load up the toys on his chest and keep on scooting with, you know, he'll problem solve.
Yeah, he problem solves, yeah.
He's amazing.
That's awesome. And to hear you guys share your story of what you would say to yourselves, that's so cool, because the reality is somebody's going to listen to this and they're going to be processing at that earlier stage of a diagnosis, and just to know that there are people like you guys and the other OI community and even broader communities that are dealing with these similar types of everyday struggles. Absolutely. That can be a voice of encouragement, and to say, you can do this, you're stronger than you think you are, your child is stronger than the doctors might even know and think, and he is a prime example of that. It's so cool. How many total fractures do you think that he has endured in his short time so far?
I believe we're at 30. Just about 30.
Just about, yeah.
I try and keep track of it, you know, only from the standpoint of rotting surgeries. Like, his doctors always want to know, like, how many times has he broken his femur, left femur, right tibia. And so we're just about at 30 of the ones we do know of. Right. I mean, there are times we suspect there's like a rib fracture or, you know, something minor, but those are the ones we know of.
And he just underwent a pretty major surgery. Tell us a little bit about that.
He had both femurs rotted. What happens with the bones is they progressively deform as after every fracture. They don't heal quite the way they were before. So they had healed in like a 90-degree angle. So they straightened his femur out and they put a rod through the center of it. And it's actually, I forget the exact name of the rod, but it actually telescopes, FD rod. So it actually pulls apart and it'll telescope as his bone grows. So it'll grow with him. It gives him a little longer length. They'll have to be redone at some point, probably 5 to 7 years. But both of his femurs were rotted that way, just to kind of provide those major bones with extra stability and extra support. If he does fracture, he can still fracture, but it'll almost be like a built-in splint, and it's supposed to help. They're supposed to help prevent fractures too.
So he'll have to have more of those.
Oh yeah, this is just the beginning. Like, he'll need his, you know, lower legs, his arms, lower and upper arms rotted. And right now he wears a collar around his neck for his kyphosis, and it's keeping that condition at bay, but his doctor's trying to prevent any sort of spinal surgery to correct that too. So, I mean, he's had at least six surgeries so far, and he's not yet 3.
What a champ. That's amazing.
Tough little boy.
So, looking ahead from where he's been and kind of where his trajectory is on a growth chart and other challenges that he's had to overcome, what does life look like for Sam in the coming years?
You know, if you had asked us that question probably last year, you know, even when he was 6 months old, I think we would be like, we have no idea. But I think now, in the last year, he has surprised us and grown so much that the possibilities for him are endless. And I truly feel in the next few years, he'll be doing all the typical things a kid his age would do. You know, he finds a way now.
He makes things work for it, yeah.
You know, I see him in school. I see him, you know, wanting to be part of, you know, maybe a chess club or a little robotics engineering club. And, you know, in his spare time, you know, making the trips to Hartford for his appointments and therapies. And, you know, I think he'll have more of a normal childhood than we had anticipated.
Than we thought he would.
And I do hope in the next 5 years, maybe at that point, he no longer relies on his feeding tube, or maybe by that point he won't need oxygen. He can get rid of some of that equipment that he has. And I would like to think in 5 years maybe he's starting to stand and take some unassisted walks, steps, with walking. That would be
that's our biggest hope.
Ideal,
I guess,
yeah. But
has he been able to connect with other kids well? Does he get an opportunity to do that?
That's a little tough because he can't go to like a typical daycare, so he has like nursing care during the day while we work, and so like our cousins and stuff like that he sees, but we never really wanted to be hovercraft parents, but we kind of have to be because if they're young too, if they trip and fall on them, like it could be devastating. So we're kind of always constantly right there, so it's a little tough for him to engage with his peers, but we're thinking this coming school year when he does start attending school that he'll get some more of that, and he needs to learn to share a little better and stuff like that.
His
Does
siblings
it every
he does
2-year-old or 3-year-old?
Yeah.
Right.
So he hasn't had too much experience with it.
And the thing is, he has such an interest. He's very social, as you can see.
He's very social. Yeah.
So he has an interest in other kids, and he'll scoot right up to them. But sometimes he's like the roughhouser, and we're telling him to be gentle, not just the other kids.
That other kids can't, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we're like, no, you have to be gentle. We're all gentle with you, but you have to be gentle too.
Right.
It's funny to see, but school will be good for him.
So he'll get to go to a traditional school then. And
2 days a week, 2 mornings a week in the fall, and he'll have a nurse one-on-one with him to help with breathing treatments and his feeds and protection, safety to keep a boundary. But it'll be really good for him. And as he gets older, that part will get easier because he'll be able to express that he's fragile to other kids, and other kids will understand it better. But right now it's not only trying to get him to understand, but the other children.
Yeah, the first few years are going to be tough, and then once they understand, it's going to be...
Exactly.
So, and you recently found out some exciting news about your family expanding. Is it okay if we talk about that for just a second?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, you are due in the fall, right?
Yep, November 3rd.
And have you found out if it's a brother or sister that's on the way?
No, we are keeping it a surprise.
That's awesome.
We tried to make it a surprise with Sam, and we made it most of the pregnancy without knowing, and we're hoping to make it
we hope this
because it doesn't matter to us one way or the other. We're just excited to be able to grow our family, and Sam's just as excited as we are, although he is convinced it's a little sister. But we're really excited. It'll be really good for all of us.
Yeah. How has growing with Samuel and helping him through all of his journey, how has that changed how you view expanding your family now? How has it prepared you?
Actually, we were a little hesitant at first, to be honest, because we weren't sure if we could handle another child.
Juggle.
To be honest,
Sam's like
Sam's
the
like
work
a couple of kids when it comes down to it, with all of his appointments and stuff. So, but we said, you know what? I guess
we didn't want his condition to define not just him, but all of us. And from day one, so many limits have been placed, I think, on him from what doctors have said and what he can and cannot do. And we've always been adamant that, if he wants to do something and expresses he wants to do something, we will find a way. And that's always been our attitude with Sam. And so the more we talked about it, we're like, why aren't we having that same attitude? That if we want more kids, we shouldn't let his condition and all the challenges that it brings and the time with doctor's appointments and all that stand in the way of that. And so we feel very blessed. Despite all of Sam's struggles, we are blessed with so much happiness.
Oh, absolutely.
Within our small family and our extended family and the support we've received. And I think this baby's going to bring even just more joy, to our everyday life, and it's what we all
It's been great to see Sam with a child, with a little baby.
So at this point, all the checkups had looked okay. There's not any cause for concern that
we were followed with a specialist the first 20 weeks, and because they were nervous, even though there's a slight chance that this child could also have osteogenesis imperfecta, everything is checked out fine. Okay,
That's awesome.
Now. So,
one of our goals in this journey is to help raise awareness from a broader standpoint of certain diagnosis, but also for your specific family. And part of that is to help raise financial support. And so we want to come alongside and help tell your story and also, help offset any expenses that, we might be able to do. Right now, what are some of the pressing the most pressing need or some pressing needs that we could kind of use to kind of help tell your story and say, hey, this is what we're trying to help Samuel's family accomplish?
I think some of the most pressing financial things would probably be, I mean, we're going to have to renovate some of our bathrooms especially and stuff like that he's not going to be able to use.
Make it handicap accessible.
Exactly, make handicap accessible. The tub, the shower.
Make it roll in.
Yeah, make it a roll in shower. Basically, accessibility
like a ramp
things
for our home, so he can get in and out of the house with his wheelchair. So things that, like, you know, we had never considered, you know, prior to having kids, that, you know, and while he may walk at some point, most of type 3 children do rely more on the wheelchair, you know, to get around. So it is, you know, a reality for us that we know we do need to make some modifications to our home, but that is a huge, you know, hurdle.
And recently with some of the insurance changes and stuff like that, like some of the things haven't been covered as well as they have in the past. So like there's a lot of things that they're like kind of unknowns in the coming up and he has tested. Sometimes we're covered in the past or not, and you know, we're fighting a little more than we had been originally with insurance, but
even the just traveling to see his doctor, things
and you
like
said the trip to Delaware is 5 hours
it's
each
about
way?
5 to 6 hours. It's like the everyday things, like all his splinting supplies, like all his wraps and all his like Surgilast for his arms, and which we go through so much of. None of that's covered by insurance, and we're constantly ordering, you know, boxes and boxes of all his supplies.
Jeff and Allison, I can't tell you how honored I am to have been able to sit here and chat with you guys and to get to meet Samuel. What an awesome thing that is for our team, and you guys are just inspiring, your whole family, and how you've approached some of the tough things that you've had to go through. And we're so thankful to have the opportunity to come along beside you and help tell your story. And we're really looking forward to how things go in August. And so just thank you for taking the time to talk with us and to just share your story with us.
What you guys do is incredible. You know, the impact you have on families and these children, and you know, just bringing awareness to conditions and bringing just togetherness with families, you know, just helping. It's huge. It's you know, it certainly makes a difference more than you realize. You know, I think there were 2 or 3 different babies born while Sam was in the hospital within our family, and they would, like, after Sam, and they were home and settled and here, and so it was really hard because there was no one we could relate to. So your organization, the fact that you're providing that for families is huge, that you are not alone, that there are other families who walk in your shoes and are there for support, and because, you know, that's what it's all about.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to us, and we're grateful for the opportunity.
At Go Shout Love, we do amazing things for amazing families with kids on rare medical journeys. Each month, we shout love for a featured family through the sale of creative apparel inspired by the child. Every purchase in August will benefit Samuel and his family as they look to increase the accessibility of their home for Samuel's wheelchair and help with medical supplies not covered by insurance. The Unbreakable t-shirt design fits Samuel perfectly. Despite being fragile and regularly enduring fractures, Samuel's toughness and passion for life proves his spirit is unbreakable. Join us in shouting love for Samuel in August by snagging a t-shirt or starting your monthly t-shirt subscription at our website, goshout.love. Thanks for listening and supporting Samuel and his family. Until next time, keep shouting love.